Good afternoon, Comrade Abed, and welcome to the Scope Television platform.
Thank you, Comrade Dora. It's my privilege to be here.
Thank you so much. This is the Talk the Talk. What are we talking about is the Talk show that we are here today to talk about the role of diplomacy. Scope is a political movement that believes in the argument of force and the force of argument. But in this case, we want to talk about the argument of force, which is diplomacy. So, in your opinion, how will you define diplomacy?
I think diplomacy is simply the art of communication in international relations, or I can say diplomacy is the art of convincing, the art of trying to win a case in the most peaceful way. Diplomacy is simply the art of negotiation. That's just diplomacy. And in our context, diplomacy will be exposing the evil plot of La République du Cameroon that they've planted for the past 50 years or so. It is also the art of exposing the evil of the French colonial masters that have been in Africa since America helped them from the Berlin Conference till now. And they have a broad program. And if we do not step up with diplomacy in a way that will be compatible with the activities of the 21st century, then they are going to outsmart us.
Thank you so much. You know, when somebody talks of diplomacy, I'm looking at the way we can relate, that means relationship between nations, how it can be done, who is involved, like the people, the parties, the states. Like we all know, the United Nations is a club of nations. The African Union is the club of African nations. If you say ECOWAS, it's a club of West African states. So it's like members in a club. What are the governing rules? And how can we implement those rules? How do we discuss to implement those rules? That is how I look at diplomacy. Something that involves even state actors. At times it involves even the most powerful of a state. Like take for instance, we heard of Berlusconi and the mafia at one point in time. You see, so he was one of the most powerful actors in that state. It even involves international organizations too, because you have to write a case. Two nations have a problem like that of Southern Cameroons, and it's been taken. You hear of the reports from the ICC reporting about the Southern Cameroons. You hear of reports from the African Court of Justice. So you hear different commissions talking about that is the act of diplomacy. We want to agree that diplomacy does not only deal with nations, but it also involves organizations and even in some cases personalities.
Oh yeah, you know, let me give you a good example of Mahatma Gandhi. He was just a monk. He did not have the organization, he did not have the institution, the structures around him. But when he started, he knew where he was going to. Nelson Mandela was a lawyer. When he started, he didn't have the organization, he didn't have the institutions, but he knew where he was going to. When you look at Martin Luther King, he was an associate pastor in a Baptist church. When he started, he didn't have the organization, the structure, but he knew where he was going to. So the first step is for us to develop those principles. And it's those principles that are going to help us build the organization. And that's why when you look at scope is mostly built on principles. And those principles are guiding us now know where we are going to. We earlier talked about how to maintain a good, healthy relationship, even as individuals. It is when we know that we have a long-term strategy and then we build on that. If we just want to react on events happening, then it's going to be so difficult for us. For example, our leaders going to live imprisonment. It was something that everybody knew would likely happen. But what was the long-term plan when it happens is now what we are scrambling to do. So if we have principles, we'll be able to have long-term strategies, and that's what diplomacy is all about. So scope is, to me, that organization, that structure that is capable of building principles that will later on be able to build institutions and structures that will be used by whoever individuals of Southern Cameroonians, of Amazonians to enact laws and rules and regulations that can now tackle all these international organizations like the United Nations, like the African Union, and all the like.
Thank you so much. In based on what you are saying, like let's move out of scope and we'll look at the revolution. At this point in time, by what you are suggesting and making a lot of citing other leaders in the war, like people like Gandhi in India, like the days of Abraham Lincoln in America, where you are, and then you know that they needed a lot of diplomacy. That means we at this stage in the Bazonian Revolution need a lot of diplomacy. Is that what you're saying?
A lot. They always said, if you need more diplomacy, you have to go for more diplomacy. When you have less diplomacy, you need to go for more diplomacy. So lack of diplomacy is the call for the need for diplomacy. And we can't say we've already had enough. I'll give you the example of the poor woman in the Bible who kept on going to the judge. She kept on going to the judge all the time, and the judge said, I will give this woman justice because I want peace. If I don't, she will keep on coming. So she finally said, okay, I'm going to give justice. At the end, the woman benefited from justice. So we need to keep on hitting hard. And that is why we have to I was trying to come up with like 3 main goals, what we need to do at the level of diplomacy, whoever we meet, whether it's an individual, whether it's a parliamentarian, whether it's a senator, whether it's a president, an ambassador, we need to provide clarity on who we are as a nation, because right now we are a nation. Either we are a nation based on the fact that we had to move from trust territory to self-governance and then an independent nation, or the fact that we were declared Ambazonia by Gojin Dinka, or we were being, the process was being reiterated by His Excellency Sisiko. We are that nation, and we need to explain that with clarity. So we need to explain why we seek the path for restoration. If we are able to explain why, and this why will mean that it's not just a political process, it's an economic process, it's a geopolitical process. So we need to explain to stakeholders the purpose, the reason, the whys behind that restoration process. And then we need to propose now possible solutions, especially to humanitarian disaster that is already happening, the genocidal activities of La République du Cameroon. We should not start from humanitarian, because each time we start from humanitarian, we absorb the strength in the process, and the process is that of the right to become a nation, the right to become self-governed, the right to secede, the right to restore, the right to become who we are, because we are already defined as a people in all institutions that you can think of, from the United Nations to the African Charter.
Thank you so much. So by so doing, you are saying that we need diplomacy even to free the leaders of Amazonia from the dungeons of La Republic. We need a lot of diplomacy. I mean, huge quantities of diplomacy to liberate the southern Cameroons, because it is a state that has been stolen. You know what people say in Pidgin, a packet, don't touch. You have your, you know it when we're kids, and then you have your biscuits. Your mother gives you your biscuit, you are eating your biscuit, and the neighbor's child say, please, for biscuits. And you say, no, they just hit it off your hand. A packet, don't touch. And then they say, don't touch, you start shivering. It is your biscuit. And then they took it and they ate it. That is what we are facing. A nation, a state that has been hijacked, a state that has been stolen, and we need more diplomacy to come out of it. You know, just like what you are talking about when people say when injustice becomes law, resistance becomes a duty. That means there must be diplomatic resistance. That is what you are saying. Because if you have more diplomacy, you need more. If you have little diplomacy, you need more. That is a very, very hard term. It's a very strong term. That's in very strong terms, you know. So diplomatic resistance is the way forward for Ambazonia. It's one of the way forwards, because we know of other ways forward, but that is one of the way forward. So I want to put it to you, who should we be engaging in diplomacy? Who should we be engaging?
That's a very good question. The first thing is we do not right now have the luxury of choosing. So we need to go with whoever. I'll give the example of Switzerland. When Switzerland came up, there was so much like, oh, Switzerland is having interest in La Republic, or in Switzerland is benefiting from the regime of Biya, or Switzerland is this. The first thing about diplomacy is exposure. Once you've exposed your opponent, you make him vulnerable. If you look at what the Democratic Party is trying to do to Donald Trump, they are trying to expose him. And then you see his poll numbers going down because they realize that they cannot keep on just protesting and protesting. They need to expose him. It cannot always be this or that. It can be both. So, for example, Switzerland is already a perfect contender that we can work with. They have many flaws, I bet too many. And I've spoken with people at the level of the Swiss embassy, at the level of those who are engaged in diplomacy, who are interested in it. And they have so many flaws, but it's for us to benefit from that. I think the United States is also a powerful, not just in terms of politics, but in terms of economy. But because our government is so big, they're able to contract individuals or different institutions. For example, the United States Congress, the Intelligence Committee can be a contender. We don't just need to go like, oh, the US government. We don't just need to go like, oh, the Department of State. No, we need to try to break them down in terms of committees at the level of the Senate, in terms of the municipalities. They have the prerogative, they have the power to be contender for the United States of America. If you look at what the United States did for the Berlin Conference, they were so passionate about helping France. You know, it was all about helping France. They developed this relationship with Europe. They thought if they go through France, then they can benefit. They did not actually need France for French sake. They needed France for American sake. And so they said, okay, Germany got you well beaten in Alsace and Lorraine. So we'll make sure that you have that part of Europe. And once the United States was able to give France, Alsace and Lorraine, from there till now, they have a perfect relationship. So we must be able to have something that we can let go, that we can lose in order to achieve something that is long lasting. I'm not talking about material in this case, but I'm talking about the level of negotiation has to be intense. It has to be superior to whatever La République du Cameroun is doing. And you realize that La République du Cameroun, they do not have the strength in diplomacy. That is why they contract law firms to fight for them. And these law firms are already in court in the United States of America because they helped to cheat the elections that brought Donald Trump now in power. They may finally win the cases, but they've realized that they are not legal entities. And so if we start from there, we can be able to break them down. So it takes me to another African nation, which is Ghana. We have former Ghanaian presidents who have come out publicly in support of what we are doing. So if we reach out to these individuals, they'll be able to take us to wherever institutions or structures Ghana will want us to go. We messed up with Nigeria because we thought, oh, Nigeria was compromising with the abduction of our leaders. It was something we could have benefited, even it was at our disadvantage. But instead of just bashing them on social media, it was something that we could have gone through another means in order to galvanize strength in Africa through Nigeria. So we have so many stakeholders that we can work with at this time.
Thank you so much. At times when we look at the field of diplomacy, like you said, we can engage people. We understand that everybody is coming there with this mindset of economic diplomacy, money, interest. Interest is one of the highest things. Then firm, power. control. That is one of the things that is driving people to becoming your friend. So somebody needs to get something from you, and you will get something from that person in return. So that is one of the things that Amazonians need to understand, that, or we have to understand as people who have engaged in self-determination, that we are going to look at anybody as an enemy or a neutral person until the person proves otherwise, because the Republic is a nation that has been existing for more than 60 years, and they simply stole our independence, and we're trying to get our own restoration, to get our nation back to where it used to be. That is something that we need to know. So the stakeholders at the stakes are very high, because the stakeholders too are very diversified. You can never really know where La Republic has put us left or right, but as a student of international relations, we need to understand that we need many stakeholders in various aspects, whether they're historical stakeholders, political, economic, or whatever, financial stakeholders. We have to keep engaging them. It could be members of parliament, it could be the local government authority, it could even be the civil society, the lawyers, like you mentioned, the law firms in America, sorry, that you're talking about. And when you look at it, you understand that America has this issue of the deep state. The deep state is those who secretly have power. They don't have the power in their hands, but they have the capacity to rule the nation. And then if you look at the deep state of America, it's in the hands of lawyers. That's why most of their presidents happen to be lawyers. Majority of the American presidents, even the senators, the governors, if you check them out, they are always like lawyers or students of international. Yeah, so that's it. So the deep state in America is the lawyers, and we have to learn how to engage them with arguments, with questions, so that will prompt their minds as students of diplomacy to foster the cause of the Southern Cameroon's people. That is something that we have to have at the back of our mind. Everybody can be engaged, but it depends on the information we are going to go and tell them. That is how it is, the nut of the matter. Whether it is the history, or whether you are going to engage somebody with the history, or whether you're going to go there to talk about some negotiations with economy, that is something that we have to make the war. Understand that Amazonia has a capacity to offer both political, interests, economic interests, socio-cultural interests, like what you saw happen in the UK. Cultural diplomacy, that's cultural festival, the Southern Cameroon's community in UK organizing a cultural festival.
That was powerful.
Yes, for people to come and see the rich cultural diversity of Amazonia. Look at what happened in Tübingen in Germany. That was cultural diversity festival, for people to know that these Southern Cameroons, this Amazonia, do they have a culture? If these people have this rich culture, then we can also consider them, because we don't want this kind of diversity or cultural diversity to be eradicated, because like we said, the house of an African man is his museum. We don't have museums. All the art and the craft is kept in the house. So when a whole village and a whole house is burned down to ashes, that means the museum is not only a house, it's a museum. And if you burn down a museum and a craft of art in Europe here, you can go to lifetime imprisonment, because you will have to pay and pay, because they may never be able to recover it, and they're trying to preserve, they're trying to maintain their culture. That is part of the hegemony of the people of Europe. So that is something that we have to take into consideration. So I want to ask you this question: what message should we be conveying to diplomats? If you go for a diplomatic visit, just a brief take, what should we be telling them? Are we going to start beating about the bush, or going to tell them in few words? What will you want to tell a diplomat?
I think what we need to tell them is, first of all, who we are. Many of them don't know who we are. Our history is not that old, but people don't seem to understand that we are not Cameroonians. It's hard to convince people just by words, but go with documents that prove that we are not Cameroonians. I don't know if this is clear at this point, but everybody needs to know that we are not Cameroonians. These were two different countries that came together. And when two come together, one does not absorb the other. So we are not Cameroonians. We are Amazonians at this point. We were at one point British Southern Cameroonians. It was an independent entity. So we are not just a political defined people. We are also a culturally recognized entity. And that is enshrined in the charters of the United Nations. So that is who we are as a people. So the next thing, after you define yourself, after you've let them know who you are, then explain the fraudulent path that was taken to absorb us. And the fraudulent path that was taken to absorb us did not just start with the plebiscite. The plebiscite was actually what cemented. The fraudulent path will include when we were being handed to France, when we were being handed to Britain, sorry, then to France, then to La République. And all these things, they have evidence. We have pillars that are still right there. Nobody even cared to hide their dirty tricks. So when you define yourself, you have to expose the fraudulent path that was taken to absorb us. And then now you can go to marginalization. Tell them how much we've tried to even make a bad union better, how much we are being exploited, how much we are being misused, how much we are being treated as sub-second class citizens. So don't start from this point, because when you start from this point, they will say, oh, other parts of Cameroon equally go through that. Because we realized that we could make it better. And then when we reach the point of restoration, it means to solve the problem, you must go back to the roots. So we want to go back to the roots of how this all started. So we are not going back to federation. We are not going back to decentralization. We are not going back to fix the messes of Biya's regime. We are going back to the root of the problem. So when you explain to somebody about who you are as a people, of course, you have to back it with the fact that it is enshrined in the charters of the United Nations and the African charters. When you define the fraudulent path that was taken to absorb us, of course, you will back it up with documents and with evidence and pictures. When you explain how we've been treated as subhumans, we've been exploited, the genocidal activities that is going on right now, then you come out now with a proposal on what you want, how you want the restoration to go. So now you need to come on with the economy. You are through with the politics and the culture. You need to come up with the economy. We are building a nation in the 21st century. It is not just about den guns. It is not just about demonstrations and protests. It is now the ability to prove that you are capable of running an economy. A country now is an economy. If you remember back then in the days of the consortium, when you had Tasang, Milan actually presented an economic roadmap. That is just a beauty that we have. We can build on that, but we've already have a foundation where we have resources spelled out, where we have businesses, how they can interact, how we can even build our own money, how we can exploit our resources, how we can maintain our natural resources and don't just destroy them, the greenhouse effect, all those things. It is a beautiful document that I want our Amazonians to always go back and get versed with. So we need to convince international diplomats what we are doing, who we are, what we are doing, and the process that we are engaging in.
Thank you. So actually, we're going to tell them who we were or who we are, and the root causes of our problems and what we want.
Yep.
Very important three things: who we are, and the root causes of the problems, and what we want and what we're fighting for, and with proofs. That is a very powerful point. You know, and most often I try to avoid marginalization, because when you talk about marginalizations, most diplomats will tell you, or most people will tell you, by the Bamili case, I've been marginalized. So I always limit it to annexation and assimilation, so that makes the problem internationalized. It doesn't make it an internal issue, because marginalization is like the Quebecans were arguing, and they got some form of autonomy. But then when we talk about it and we just limit it to annexation and assimilation, they equally understand who is the father of assimilation. That is it. So it already resonates. They know that if it's assimilation, then the hand of a foreign power is behind the scenes. So, Comrade Abet, I don't want to take a lot of your time, but I want to say, in your opinion, should diplomacy be done openly or
Yep.
behind closed doors? Just make a brief take so that we can keep it short. Thank you.
I think it should be done openly. The first thing is that La République du Cameroun is the chief emperor of darkness. They like it when it's secret. They hate it when we expose them. And so when you do everything in the open, it's hard for them to work with you. They've been able to intensify military crackdowns because they cannot do diplomacy. You know, Woodrow Wilson was the one who fought so hard after the mess by the German chancellor in secret diplomacy and the annexation of Africa and the scramble and all the like. Woodrow Wilson actually came up and defined diplomacy. And he said a lot of things, and one of them, let me just read from here. Open covenant of peace openly arrives at, after which there shall be no private international understandings of any kind, but diplomacy shall proceed, always frankly and in public view. Let me tell you, if I want to do something against Bia, and I let CNN know about it, and BBC knows about it, and this and that, all the press they know about it. Even if I'm in the Republic, they cannot arrest me. One of the reasons why Nganam was released immediately was because he made his school to understand that he was going there. He made his journalists to understand that he was going there. Lawyers understood. So because La Republique knew that all eyes were on Ghana, Patrice, they immediately released him. But those who were engaged in other forms of secret diplomacy, they are still languishing in jail because people don't even know that they are there. So the first thing we have to do is expose. As I told you, BIA is using almost, I think, 5 different law firms right now. We don't know them, and they have the right to remain secret. But if we expose them, then we would have exposed the evil they are doing. So whatever thing we are doing, it may look like, oh, it's dangerous, but it's to our benefit because we will be exposing the regime of Biya, and they have nothing to offer once they are exposed, apart from just keep on saying, oh, France will fix the problem, oh, we'll fix the problem. But we need now to pull them out from wherever they are hiding.
Thank you so much. You know, what we're talking about is another branch of diplomacy, like, okay, openly is advocacy. Loud, clear, social media, very strongly. But if you have to say that I have to meet a diplomat, you know that most diplomats don't like the social media. That is the truth about it. If somebody were to promise you help, definitely it's not on social media.
Yep.
The person wants to push a button because they feel like the war of international relations is very complicated. Looking at the Southern Cameroon situation, the legality of the struggle, it's very clear Southern Cameroon should be liberated. There shouldn't be any problem, no gunshots, nothing like what we are seeing down there. But now when you look at this issue of like the war of international relation, I'm your friend, we have certain things in common. Making an oppressor know that I have been here, meeting somebody who does not like CNN to cover him, and then the person is promising help to you, the oppressor may fight you in another aspect, that person who wants to help you. So I think that it can be done both openly. That is loud advocacy, that is so hot, that brings down the morale of that regime and makes everybody know that, hey, so this is what you do. We don't want to trade with you because of this kind of attitude. Look at the human rights abuses. But secretly, because there are other people like the diplomats of country representatives, ambassador of France, and let me say ambassador of Germany in America will not want you to put him on social media. So it is both sides. It's a win-win. If you come this way, it is advocacy that is very loud on social media. You go to Punchline, BBC is reporting, that is advocacy reporting on the sentencing of the Amazonian leaders. And it was not a fair trial. Everybody said, oh, so this is not a fair trial. Hi, I know something about this country. This country is a dustbin. This country is worse off than a banana republic that's a different thing. But when it
Yeah.
comes to the fact that we want to see a real diplomat, it's not something that will be done. So it is done both secretly and it is done openly. That's how I see it. What do you
Oh yeah,
think?
I think
So many.
for security reasons, we need to do it privately. When I talk of secret diplomacy, I mean at the level of already um, establishing documents of things that have to be established. It's already talking about the process of uh, the process is sometimes in the background, but the actual event is in the open.
Yeah.
I don't know if you understood at this point.
Perfect.
So, for example, if I'm going to meet the congresswoman for the 47th district of California, I've written a letter to her, and then I've made a phone call to her, and then I know that there are a lot of public agencies in California who will likely thwart that process. So I keep it secret. But once I am there, because I know she's a public figure, everything that comes out of there will be public.
Yeah.
So that even if La Republic is going behind, she will be aware of the first step that he already took. You see, so at the level of establishing documents or establishing facts, they should be made public. But at the level of the processes and how we get there and how we bring this person in and out, those should be private and secret first for security reasons.
Thank you so much. That is very true. Thank you so much, Comrade Albert. This is part one of the rule of diplomacy, and the revolution is still to be continued. Thank you for your time and welcome.
One more thing before we go, Comrade Dora. Sorry
Yeah,
for taking your
yeah,
time.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you see, I would like to call on everybody to um, get into um, to join the line of what has just happened with Tisiko and his cabinet. It's life imprisonment. It's scary. They have families, and it has also given us the opportunity to take the case to higher levels. We could not have appealed the case until judgment was passed. So now that judgment has been passed, it is hallelujah. We are happy it has happened, even though it is sad. It is uh, sometimes crunching my heart. But I think that is what we needed. So I want to call on everybody to chip in something to see how much we can help to make sure that at the level of the Hague, we can petition this case and expose Cameroon the more. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for that remark. It is very, very important for Amazonians to show solidarity, to show sympathy, and go beyond sympathy to empathy, to see that the judgment on our comrades, the Nora 10, and our prisoners of war, we should stand by them, we should support their families, we should keep advocating from there for them. We should understand that a closed mouth is a closed destiny. And we should understand that excuses do not build an empire. That is something we need to know. Amazonians must understand that we did not come to this earth to be impressed La République or the French regime or the French administration. We came to this earth to express ourselves as a people, having an identity, having a country that once existed with institutions, with a legal system of governance that was democratic, with a currency, and that is something that is documented in the books. That is something Amazonians need to know. And that is why this war for restoration is worth it. And we're going to keep fighting for it. So thank you, Comrade Abed, for your time.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
for that
God
powerful
bless
remark.
Amazonia.
Okay.
Thank
Long
you.
live the Federal Republic of Amazonia.